Is there evidence of a demon growling on a radio podcast? Plus, we're going to be diving into evidence for angels, for demons, medically documented and recorded miracles of healing that are going to blow your mind, because we have with us the best-selling author of the Case for series. You may have read The Case for Christ, The Case for Grace, The Case for Creation, and so on. Right here with us on Encounter today, the former award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, now Christian, advancing the cause of Christ. Here he is, Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel, we are so honored to have you on Encounter today.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Great to be with you and your listeners.
Well, we're excited about your new book. And of course, you're a prolific author. I want to talk to you about the Case for series that you've done. But first, as I was researching this, I discovered what potentially one of your earliest books, which was called Reckless Homicide.
Yeah, right.
Ford's Pinto Trial.
Right.
All right, you got to tell us about this.
Well, yeah, that was before I was a Christian, actually. I was legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, and there was a big case at the time involving the Ford Pinto car, which there were 3 girls killed in a Pinto accident. They were burned to death. They should have walked away, but the charge was that the way they designed the car caused them to be killed in the accident because of the way the gas tank exploded. And so Ford was charged with reckless homicide for the way it designed the car. And I actually broke a lot of stories involving that case because I got a hold of some secret Ford memos that showed that they knew before they put the car into production that it was susceptible to blowing up when hit from behind in low or moderate speed accidents. And
oh my goodness.
They went ahead and did it because it was cheaper to do it that way. And so Ford was acquitted ultimately of the criminal charges, but I ended up writing the book and actually reproduced some of the Ford documents in that book. And it was a big scandal at the time.
Well, I can imagine. It just goes to it shows your background and where this investigative mindset comes from as far as your ministry now. But was that the only major case back then that you covered, or were there some other highlights?
I covered a bunch of other cases. Yeah, a lot of political corruption cases in Chicago. I broke a story about how the tollway system and runways at O'Hare Airport were all bid rigged by the contractors. And I got a hold of some secret grand jury testimony that documented that, and I broke that story. I broke a lot of stories back then. I was doing a lot of investigative work. We got the governor, a guy running for governor of the state of Illinois, to resign that position after I and my team established that he had done some, I believe, as I recall, he assaulted his wife or something and covered it up. And so, yeah, we did a lot of investigative projects back then. That was kind of our bread and butter.
Yeah, I didn't put the two together because you were the legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, and I didn't think Chicago.
Yeah.
Which, if you're going to be a legal editor, Chicago's the place to do it.
Yeah, you want to find some corruption? We got plenty of corruption in Chicago. No
so
kidding.
It is true. I mean, what they say about Chicago, as far as you're concerned, I mean, the corruption behind the politics there in Chicago is just.
It's gotten cleaned up to some degree. I covered the legal system a lot. We had one case in which they bugged the FBI bugged the chambers of a criminal court judge, and you could actually hear the bribe being put into his desk drawer. He was convicted of extortion and sent to prison for 10 years. But there used to be a lot more judicial corruption in Chicago than I think you find now. But back in those days, it was pretty wild. I mean, I covered the Harry Alleman case. Harry was a hitman for the crime syndicate in Chicago, and he was set free by a judge who'd been bribed $10,000 to let him go. And that was later discovered, and when the FBI went to question the judge, who had by then retired, he committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
So a very, very sad situation. But I think the judicial corruption is not what it used to be in Chicago.
Well, they even say in the last few elections, what's the price of a judge? And they, $10,000. And you kind of wince at that and say that can't be possible. But you've seen it in your own personal career and life.
Yeah, we really have. There was some really distressing cases in Chicago that we covered.
Which leads us into this journey. And for those who aren't familiar, I can't imagine them not being familiar. I guess your breakout book, you had done books previous to this, but the one that really hit was The Case for Christ. Can you tell us a little bit of the history behind that.
Yeah, it's really a book that documents my journey from atheism to faith. I became an atheist as a young man, and my wife was agnostic. And she met a Christian nurse who became her friend and shared Jesus with her, invited her to church. And then my wife came up to me one day and gave me the worst news any atheist husband could get. She said, "I've decided to become a Christian."
Yeah.
And my first reaction was divorce. I was going to walk out.
Really?
Yeah. But then I thought maybe I could rescue her from this cult. Even as an atheist, I recognize all I would have to do, and it sounds very simple, is disprove the resurrection of Jesus. Because dead people don't come back to life on the third day. And so I used my journalism training, my legal training, and ended up spending 2 years of my life investigating the historical data for the resurrection of Jesus and other aspects of the case for the existence of God, until November the 8th of 1981, when I realized that in light of the avalanche of evidence that points so powerfully toward the truth of Christianity, it would have taken more faith to maintain my atheism than to become a Christian. And that's the day I repented of my sin, received Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And my life, my values, my character, my morality, my attitudes, my marriage, my parenting, I mean, all these things over time began to change for the good. It was 2 Corinthians 5:17. You know, the old is gone, the new has come.
It really is a startling story that's been documented. I was telling you before we came on here that one of the first Christian movies I saw that I said, that is a quality movie. It didn't feel like a Christian movie, was the one about your life. Where can people find that, by the way?
You know, just today, I learned that it's now streaming on Angel.
Oh, wow.
Angel Studios is streaming. It was on Netflix for 3 years. It came out in 2017, so it's been around for a little while. But they just did a great job. I can't take credit for it. They did a great job in that film. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. After they finished the film, they sent a copy of it that I could watch on my computer. So my wife and I watched it, and they said, "What do you think?" And I said, "It's good. Yeah, it's good. I'm thinking it's a plus.
It's good.
It's not great." But they said that's not good enough. And they went out and they shot 10 new scenes to make it a better movie. They didn't have to do that. They could have gotten by, but no, they wanted to make a great movie. And they shot 10 new scenes and took it to an A+. In fact, we got an A+ from CinemaScore, which is very rare. That's the people who interview people as they're leaving the theater and ask them what they thought, how they would grade the movie. And we got an A+. Only about 3 movies a year get an A+. So they did a great job, and we were quite pleased. And we've seen so many people come to faith around the world because of that film. In fact, there's a small church in New Zealand that rented a movie theater and showed the movie, and 22 people came to faith.
Oh, wow.
So we've seen a lot of people led to the Lord through that film.
And the movie's called The Case for Christ,
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
The Case for Christ was available now on Angel, or you could probably find it on Amazon Prime and all that other kind of stuff. But it's a must-watch if you haven't seen it, guys. I mean, just as pure entertainment, it is a wonderful movie. I mean, it's a great movie, inspiring and life-changing. So if you know anybody who doesn't know the Lord, get that movie in front of them. Tremendous. And that led to, were you expecting it to have the impact that it had?
No, I really didn't. The funny thing is, I remember after they sent us that film, and they sent us a final copy of the really good version, and I came home one day, and my wife was watching it on the computer again, and I said, "Honey," and she was crying. I said, "Honey, how many times have you watched this movie?" And she said, I think it was like 17 times or something. And I said, "Why do you keep watching it?" And she said, "I'm trying to get cried out."
Oh,
Because I don't want to watch it first time in public and cry. And sure enough, first time in public, we both cried when we saw it. But God has used that, and the gospel is in it, and the evidence is in it for the truth of the resurrection of Jesus, it's thrilling. I mean, my greatest goal in life has changed from winning the Pulitzer Prize, which was what it was when I was a journalist, to now my greatest goal in life is to drag as many people to heaven with me as I can. So I'm an evangelist by nature and by gifting, and I just want to see people meet Jesus Christ and embrace him, see them born again, see their eternity rewritten.
Well, it's happening, and we're feeling the effect of it even here in backwoods North Carolina. But and that was 2017 when the movie came out. When did the book originally? When was it published?
The book originally came out in 1998.
98. How many copies has it sold?
Over 5 million.
Would you have ever imagined?
No. Although I'll tell you what, I grew up in Chicago, as you know, and I'm a Cubs fan because when I was 2 years old, Ernie Banks, who was a rookie, he was Mr. Cub, he kissed me on the cheek at a banquet. So I've been kissed by Ernie Banks. So I'm a Cubs fan. So in Chicago, often in Wrigley Field, the batter will hit the ball and it'll be a high fly and it'll be caught by the center fielder.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, because of the wind of the Windy City, sometimes people hit the ball. They don't hit it any harder, but the wind takes it for a home run. And that's what I feel God has done with that book. I hit the ball, I wrote the book, but God has taken it so far beyond anything I ever put into it that I feel like when I hear stories of people coming to faith through the book, like Evel Knievel.
Evel Knievel was a drunk, he was a womanizer, he was a gambler. And crazy. He jumped over huge things with his motorcycle. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most broken bones of any human being. But he's on the beach in Florida late in his life, and God spoke to him. He said, I felt it on my inside. And the voice said, Robert, which is his real name, Robert, I've saved you more times than you'll ever know. Now you need to come to me through my son, Jesus. And he doesn't even know what to do. And he said, who's Jesus? So he calls Frank Gifford, the sportscaster, Kathy Lee Gifford's husband, and says, Frank, I had this experience. Who's Jesus? And Frank said, get that book by Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ.
Knievel came to faith through the book, and so many people have. I don't feel like taking any credit for it. And that's not false humility. It's just like I'm just kind of a third party watching as God does something with this book that I certainly am not responsible for.
Well, I mean, it takes off, and it has. And by the way, guys, we're going to put a link in the description so you can get a copy of this book if you haven't already. It is a must-read. Every Christian needs it in their library. And this begins to soar. And of course, as a friend of mine says, success leaves clues. Do part twos.
Yeah.
And a whole series began from that. And I don't remember which came next. Was it A Case for Grace or Creation? Which was next?
I did Case for a Creator next. A Case for Faith, which looks at 8 big objections of Christianity. And then The Case for the Real Jesus, which is now called In Defense of Jesus. And ultimately, The Case for Miracles, The Case for Heaven. And The Case for Christmas, which is coming out this fall. I did a version years ago, and now we have a new version coming out this fall called The Case for Christmas. And The Case for Easter, which is also, just contains the evidence for the resurrection.
It's for believers to get equipped to know what they believe and why they believe it, and it's for unbelievers because when they read this, they're going to be removed from all of their, alleviated from all their excuses. And the next one, that you've done, which was, I was talking with a friend of mine who works with Destiny Image. His name is Larry Sparks, and I think you've interviewed with him. And he said he's now wading into the supernatural, and you've got this amazing book called Seeing the Supernatural.
Yes.
Investigating angels, demons, mystical dreams, near-death encounters, and other mysteries of the unseen world. What made you decide? Because the books you were doing, they're, as far as Christianity is concerned, widely accepted.
Yeah.
You get into this, you're putting yourself in the firing line for controversy unnecessarily. So what made you decide to do this?
Well, a couple of things. As you know, I'm an evangelist, and I found out that 8 out of 10 Americans believe that there is something beyond this realm that we can see, touch, and put in a test tube. But many of them get involved with all kinds of paranormal stuff. It's not biblical, it's dangerous, and so forth. And I thought, let me investigate. Is the Bible telling us the truth when it talks about the supernatural realm, angels, demons, and so forth? And so as someone trained in journalism and law, I'm really looking to make a case. I'm looking for corroboration. I'm looking for evidence. I'm looking for facts. I'm looking for empirical data. And so that's what I pursued. And so, I looked at things like near-death experiences and deathbed visions, which is a fascinating area, contemporary encounters with angelic beings and so forth. And I found that there are good cases to be made that these things point toward a realm beyond what we can see and touch. The Bible's telling us the truth. There is such a thing as angels. There are such things as demons. And we have mystical dreams. We have all kinds of things breaking out in the Middle East. So I think it's a fascinating area. And my hope is two things. Number one, that it'll deepen the faith of Christians who maybe haven't delved into this before. But secondly, my hope is they'll give the book away then to someone who's spiritually confused. Maybe someone who's kind of dabbling in the paranormal, psychics or whatever, and just give it to them so they can look at what is biblically accurate and biblically supported. And for instance, when I look at near-death experiences and deathbed visions, there are 47 points of correspondence or consistency between the Bible and near-death experiences and deathbed visions. So these are biblical. And so, I want to make that case. And my hope is that a lot of people who are just curious about this stuff will find the truth of Jesus as they investigate it.
It's really interesting reading that type of examination of it, where normally there's two ditches. There are those who completely ignore the supernatural, and as you put it, there are those who are obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And how do we balance that out?
Yes. That's a great observation, and you're absolutely right. In fact, I once did a chapter in a book called, the topic of that chapter was how many Christians are embarrassed by the supernatural.
Yeah.
And why is that? It's because in America, we're okay with our neighbors knowing that we're Christians. Oh yeah, I go to church and I believe in Jesus and the resurrection. I go to church on Sundays and so forth. But I don't get into that weird stuff. You're not gonna get me talking about angels or demons or anything weird, because they're afraid their credibility is going to be shot. And I think we have to be honest and say that if the Gospels are telling us the truth, which I believe they are, then Jesus was an exorcist. Jesus cast out demons. Jesus did the miraculous. And so what evidence is there in the 21st century that miracles are still happening? Well, I tell you, there is incredible documented evidence of the miraculous and various healings taking place. And what evidence is there of the demonic? Well, there's plenty of evidence that is a very real phenomenon.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you
can I tell you something real quick?
Yes.
This is hilarious. I don't know if hilarious is the right word, but I was doing a live national radio show a couple of weeks ago on the Moody Bible Network to hundreds of stations around the country. And we're talking about the book, and there was a caller who called in, a very nice woman from Florida. And as soon as the topic of demons came up, I heard this growl. And I'm thinking, whoa, is that my imagination? What in the world was that? But I didn't say anything because we're on live national radio. But after the show ended, I said to the host, did you hear that? And he said, yes. He said, wasn't me, wasn't her, wasn't you. What in the world was that? And we actually have the recording of it. And I actually played it on the air for another interview I did.
And as soon as I was like, genius, I started hearing static and these voices. And I was like, it was like, ask Pap and Granny.
And it just seems more than a coincidence that when the topic of demons came up, that we had this guttural growl take place that we can't account for. And it was almost as if these demons were saying, yeah, take us on if you dare.
So as an investigative journalist and someone who has an analytical mind, how do you prove the intangible? How do you approach this to say, okay, I want to check these boxes when I'm showing someone that demon powers are real?
Yeah, in each of these categories, whether it's mystical dreams, near-death experiences, deathbed visions, the demonic or whatever, I'm looking for cases where there is corroboration. In other words, there's evidence that goes beyond just our mental facility, because we can imagine things, right? I mean, our subconscious can bring up things. We can be mistaken about things. Yeah, sure. So, but how do we know it's real? And so in each of these cases, that's what I try to look at. So I'll give you a couple examples. In the case of healings, I looked at cases that have been published, first of all, researched by medical researchers and published in peer-reviewed medical journals. So we have the case of a woman who was blind for 17 years, went to a school for the blind, learned to read Braille, married a Baptist pastor, and then one night they're getting ready to go to bed. She's in bed. He comes over to her and he starts to cry. And he puts his hand on her shoulder and begins to pray. And he says, Lord, I know you can heal my wife. I know you can do it. And Lord, I pray that you'll do it tonight. And with that, she opened her eyes to perfect eyesight. And her eyesight has now remained for 47 years. So this is not a fluke.
Wow.
And she said, I was blind when my husband prayed for me, and then all of a sudden, I can see perfectly. It was a miracle, and it was a miracle. How else do you explain that unless you rule out the possibility of the miraculous at the outset? So to me, that's documentation. Give you another example. I have a chapter about dreams that are happening in the Middle East among Muslims, where they're meeting Jesus in their dreams. But here's the key. In fact, it's been estimated that up to a third of converts from Islam to Christianity in the last couple of decades have been with people who've had this dream of Jesus beforehand.
A third? I didn't realize it was that.
Yeah,
wow.
To a third. And so, but here's the key. There's corroboration. This is not just something coming from their subconscious, because first of all, why would a devout Muslim in a closed country dare to dream about the Christian Jesus, because it might lead them into apostasy and a possible death sentence. So there's no motivation for them to do this. But here's where the corroboration comes in. I'll give you an actual account of a woman named Noor, Muslim mother of 8 children. She lives in Cairo. She has a Jesus dream. Jesus appears to her. They're walking along a lakeshore. She's mesmerized by Jesus. She's enthralled by Jesus. He's so beautiful. She feels the love, and there's no shame. And she says, Jesus, why do you appear to me? I'm just a poor Muslim mother of 8 children. Why do you appear to me? And Jesus said, my friend will tell you tomorrow. And she said, who's your friend? Well, Jesus gestures to a man who'd been walking with them, but she was so mesmerized by Jesus, she didn't recognize this guy. She didn't notice him at first. So Jesus said, my friend will tell you. The next day, she goes to the crowded marketplace in Cairo, and she sees that man from her dreams. And she goes up to say, you're the one. He said, what are you talking about? You're the same glasses, same face, same clothes. You're the one. He said, did you have a dream about Jesus? She said, yes. Turned out he was an underground church planter. He didn't want to go to the crowded marketplace in Cairo on Friday afternoon. It's chaotic, but he went because he felt like God had an assignment for him. He meets Noor, but here's the key. He pulls her aside, he opens the Bible, and he shares the gospel with her. That's the corroboration. There's something beyond just a dream. There's something that confirms it, this independent encounter she had with the man from her dream. So that's the kind of corroboration I'm looking for. With the demonic, there's a man, a psychiatrist from an Ivy League university, Richard Gallagher. He's highly credentialed. He teaches at some very elite colleges in the Northeast. A medical doctor, of course, because he's a psychiatrist, trained in psychiatry. And he and his wife had, this is 20 years ago, had 2 cats. And the cats got along great. They loved each other. They slept together. They played together. They loved each other. No problem with the 2 cats until one night. And the 2 cats started to attack each other, just clawing at each other, snarling at each other, trying to kill each other. It was unbelievable the way they attacked each other. And they pulled them apart and put them in separate rooms and thought, what was that? Well, the next morning, the doorbell rings. And there is a Catholic priest with a woman. This was a prearranged appointment. The priest was bringing this woman to be examined psychiatrically by Dr. Gallagher. She claimed to be the high priestess of a satanic cult. Doorbell rings. He opens the door. This high priestess of a satanic cult looks up at him with a sneer and says, so, how'd you like those cats last night?
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And so Dr. Gallagher has been involved now for 20 years with doing deliverance ministry, doing exorcisms. And, this is a man that understands what constitutes mental illness versus a demonic possession. And there's a huge difference. And so he has seen people who are demonically possessed, who speak in Latin, a language they didn't know. He saw a petite woman who was indwelled by demons, who picked up a 217-pound Lutheran deacon and threw him across the room. He and 8 other eyewitnesses saw a woman possessed by Satan levitate off of a bed. So these are documented cases. This is a guy that knows. In fact, I have a quotation from the former president of the American Psychiatric Association saying Dr. Gallagher is a highly credentialed, highly high integrity,
Wow.
trustworthy individual. This is no flake. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, is that kind of corroboration.
It seems you're kind of blowing the narrative out of the water of the militant cessationist that has become extremely evangelistic, and it seems in the last few years.
Yeah.
And of course their response is going to be to run to the fringes and find some sort of counterfeit somewhere,
Right.
To say, see, that's fake because this is fake. They're all fake.
Right.
What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of cessationists. There are some who
Yes.
believe that the spiritual gift of healing and tongues and so forth has passed away with the apostles. There are some who believe that, yes, they believe that, but they also believe that God still does the miraculous. And that he
Yes.
still can do the miraculous. And so they accept the fact that God does intervene today in miraculous ways. They just believe the gift of healing is no longer operative. So there are different kinds of cessationists. I want to say, I look at the evidence. I'm just evidence driven. And when I see cases like the one I mentioned about the blind woman and so many others that I document in the book, I mean, one involving Barbara Snyder, who was healed instantly of multiple sclerosis after 480 Christians prayed for her on her deathbed. I mean, these are dramatic, powerful stories. And I look at that and I say, that's not where the evidence points. The evidence points to the fact that God is still active in a supernatural way in our world. In fact, I commissioned a study by George Barna, the researcher. And it was a scientifically valid public opinion poll in which we asked a cross-section of Americans, have you ever had at least one experience in your life that you can only explain as being a miracle of God? And 38% said yes. And here's the key. Let's say, let's just pick a number. Let's say 99% of them are wrong. Let's say 99% think it's a miracle, but it's just a huge coincidence. So let's throw out those. Even if you did that, it would still mean there were 1 million miracles in the United States alone. God is still in the miracle business today.
Yes. Wow, and it's so encouraging and uplifting to hear this. And you're not preaching it from a denominational perspective. You're not preaching it purely from the evidence.
Yeah.
And of course, backing up with Scripture what it is that you're saying. And I want to ask you in a minute for some other documented miracles that are in your book that have kind of surprised you. But those of you that are watching, have you experienced a miracle? I want to hear from you in the comments. Let's blow the cessationist narrative out of the water right now with your personal testimony. Let us know what God's done in your life, a verifiable miracle that God's done for you. I want to see it in the comments. I'm going to be reading every single one of these. We may even give you a call and have you testify about it a little bit, but we want to hear from you. These stories are stunning. And how is it that you went about researching these?
Well,
where do you even begin?
Well, I began by going to one of the leading experts on the miraculous, Dr. Craig Keener at Asbury Seminary. He's written a 2-volume work. What is it, like 800,000 words on miracles? It's unbelievable. He's done research for decades on this topic, and he has documented many cases. And then some of them I pursued myself. So I'll give you an example. There's a woman named Barbara. Barbara, when she was in high school, was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic with multiple sclerosis. And it accelerated. It took over her body very quickly. Pretty soon she was on her deathbed. She was literally clinging to life. She hadn't walked by that point in 7 years, so her legs had atrophied. One lung was collapsed, the other lung was at 50%. She was blind by then. She could only see, virtually blind, she could only see gray shapes. Her hands she was curled up in bed in hospice, waiting to die, like a pretzel. Her fingers were bent so that they were touching her wrists, and her feet were extended. And she had a tube in her throat so she could breathe from oxygen canisters. And also she lost control of her urination and bowels. So the doctors agreed, we're just going to let her die. Next time she gets pneumonia, there's nothing we can do. We're just prolonging the inevitable. But some Christians called WMBI, which is the Christian radio station in Chicago, and said, would you ask people to pray for poor Barbara? She's on her deathbed. And so we documented that at least 480 people prayed for Barbara. How do we know? Because they wrote letters to Barbara saying, I'm praying for you. So on Pentecost Sunday, Barbara is in her room in hospice waiting to die, and 2 of her friends are there, and they're reading her some of these letters from people who are praying for her. And she hears from the corner of the room the voice of God. And God said to her, get up, my child, and walk. Well, she's stunned. She's stunned. So she rips out the tube from her throat so she could talk. She says, go get my parents. God just told me to get up and walk. So her friends ran out, but she couldn't wait. She jumped out of bed. Now, I interviewed her about this, and I said, what was that like? And she said, well, I jumped out of bed, and the first thing I noticed were my feet were flat on the floor. And my feet had been rigidly extended for 7 years, and all of a sudden, they were normal. And then I looked, and my hands came unfolded. And I realized they no longer were rigid and like a pretzel. And then she said, the third thing I noticed, I could see. She said, you'd think that'd be the first thing I noticed. It was actually the third thing I noticed. But her vision was back. She could see. She was completely, instantaneously healed of multiple sclerosis. Her father came in, fell to his knees, grabbed her, or her mother rather, grabbed her calves and said, your muscle tone has returned.
Wow.
Her legs had atrophy. So that night was Pentecost Sunday, and she went to a Wesleyan church in Wheaton, Illinois, Wheaton Wesleyan Church, and they were doing service that night. So they got in the car, they drove to the service, and the pastor is up there, and he says, does anybody have any announcements? So Barbara starts...
Boy, do we.
Boy, do we ever. So Barbara starts walking down the center aisle. People hadn't seen Barbara out of a wheelchair in 7 years. The whole place erupts with people singing, Amazing Grace, I once was blind and now I see. Barbara was instantaneously, totally healed of multiple sclerosis. Her doctor said, this is medically impossible. In fact, one of her doctors, she went the next day to be examined by her doctor, and her doctor said later, I saw her walking down the corridor toward my office, and my thought was, oh, she died, and that's a ghost.
Wow.
Said, this is impossible.
That's more probable.
Yeah, that's right. That's more probable than what happened. God instantaneously healed. That is a well-documented case. By the way, she married a pastor. And
you spoke with her personally.
I did. I interviewed her. I actually have the video of the interview. And she and her husband pastors a church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Recently retired to Florida. But that's just one case. And Craig Keener has documented so many of them, including cases where we have a physical exam, a miracle, and then immediately after that, another physical exam. That's hard to explain away.
Yeah.
So let me give you another quick example. There's a woman with a PhD from Harvard University. She's a professor at Indiana University, huge secular university. She heard that miracles had broken out in Mozambique. Now, we know that miracles cluster in places where the gospel is just breaking in.
Yeah.
Well, she wants to check this out. She's a professor with a PhD from Harvard. So she says, I'm going to investigate this. So she gets a team together. They go to Mozambique. They go into the brush, and they say, bring us all your blind and deaf. So they bring all the people who are blind, deaf, or have severe hearing or vision loss, and they scientifically test them right then. What is your level of vision? What is your level of hearing? They get that documented. Then, immediately, they are prayed for in the name of Jesus Christ by people who tend to have a track record of God using them this way. And then, immediately after that, they're tested scientifically again. Is there any change? Is there any improvement? And guess what they found? There was improvement in virtually every case. In fact, get this, the average improvement in visual acuity was tenfold. There was a woman named Martine, when they first encountered her, could not hear the equivalent of a jackhammer next to her. After 10 minutes of prayer in the name of Jesus, she can now hear normal conversations.
Wow.
Well, they were so blown away by this, they said, we got to see if we can replicate this. So they went to another place where the gospel is breaking in, Brazil. They did the same test. They got the same results. This is a rigorous scientific study that has been published in a secular, scientific, peer-reviewed medical journal, the Southern Medical Journal, a well-respected medical publication. And I in my book, I interview that PhD from Harvard, and I said, how do you explain this? Well, as a professor at a secular university, she's not going to say it was Jesus Christ, but she said something is going on here. So this isn't fakery. It's not fraud. It's not somebody trying to get people to send in money to a televangelist. It's not the placebo effect. It's not an emotional atmosphere that's playing on people's emotions. Something, she said, is going on. And I agree. I think it's something supernatural.
And God is no respecter of persons. And
That's
ladies
right.
and gentlemen watching right now, you can see the same miracles in your life. And hearing about these miracles can bolster your faith, which is why the link is in the description for Seeing the Supernatural. You need to get your copy. Brother Strobel, in a moment, I want to ask you about the whataboutisms that eventually come up. What about those who don't get healed? I want to ask you, you alluded earlier to, is God still working today, or actively are the gifts still in operation today? I'm going to ask you about all of that in our uncensored conversation at Revival Nation. So guys, if you want that conversation, you have to go to revivalnation.com and become a member, and you'll get that conversation there. But who is this book for those who are watching this right now? Who needs to click that link and go get it?
I think it's for any Christian who wants to have their faith deepened, their courage increased, their confidence in Jesus reaffirmed. And then secondly, I hope that they give that book away to someone in their life who's spiritually confused. Because the gospel is in it. In the final chapter, I spell out the gospel as a prayer to pray to receive Christ. And there's so many people who we can use as a bridge because there's curiosity about this topic. I was shocked. The book came out in late March, and the first week it made the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow, come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, because people are fascinated by this topic. And when we have credible evidence, it really does give us increased confidence that our faith in God is well placed.
Yeah, and you can get that credible evidence to you and your loved ones who desperately need it. In these dark times, we need something to encourage us. So click the link in the description, Seeing the Supernatural. Now we're going to head and have an uncensored conversation with Brother Strobel and have some challenging questions, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But Lee Strobel, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And those of you watching online, make sure you share this. There's a lot of people who need to hear these testimonies, need to hear this message, and we want to hear your testimony in the comments as well. So let us know what God's done in your life, and we'll see you next time right here at Encounter Today, and we'll see you over at revivalnation.com for more uncensored content. We'll see you there. The Bible warns about deception in the last days, but what if one of the great deceptions is what you believe or don't believe about the rapture of the church? I dive into that and much more in my latest book, They Lied to You About the Rapture. Get your copy today.